On this prequel episode, we've got our Babe fan reaction. We're learning about spy fiction and previewing the Bourne Identity. Hello and welcome back to this Films Lit podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. On this prequel episode, we've got quite a bit to cover, so let's get right into it with our first thing that we always do on every prequel episode, our patron shoutouts. We have 2 new patrons this week. Thank you for joining us. First up, at the $2 Newbery Medal winner, which grants you early access like the night before, and ad-free, which is still not an issue. But if it ever becomes an issue. And that new patron is Gary French. Thank you, Gary, for signing on. And at the $5 level, we have a brand new patron, Colin Osborne. Colin, thanks you for joining us at the Hugo Award-winning level, which grants you not only priority or early release and ad-free, but also bonus content, which includes most recently Acrimony by Tyler Perry. And coming up later this week, we'll be releasing our bonus episode for the month of April, which is all about pandemics. Pandemic Palooza. We watched Outbreak and Contagion, and we're going to record an episode discussing both of them, comparing them, contrasting them, and particularly comparing them and contrasting them to the reality of the last year and a half. So it's going to be exciting. Just minor spoilers. If you haven't seen Contagion since it came out or ever at all, watching it post-pandemic is a wild freaking experience. We made a whole movie starring Matt Damon 10 years ago and then forgot about it, apparently, because then it all just happened. It's wild.
Basically, yeah.
It's wild. So if you want to hear us talk about that, if you support us for $5 a month or more, you get access to that. So thank you to our new patrons. And as always, we have our Academy Award winners who support us for $15 a month. They are Jeff Niederhofer, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Shelby says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter. So happy to know that Babe is the one movie from my childhood that is still good. There's got to be more than one.
I mean, I think there is a comment later addressing this.
We'll discuss it. It definitely holds up. We'll say that much. And finally, our top patron of all time, Alina Doletkolova. Thank you all so very much, as always, for supporting us. And in case you don't know what you get at the $15 level, you get all the other stuff that I mentioned, but you also get priority requests, which is what Babe was, and it was also what the Bourne Identity is. So we move through those patron requests quicker. They go high on the list, and we move through them. So we'll talk about who requested the Bourne Identity here in a little bit, but that's what you get at the $15 level. All right, it's time to find out what everybody had to say about Babe.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
So on Facebook, we had a total of 3 votes. All of them were for the movie. We did not get any feedback on Facebook this time, which is fine.
Facebook's algorithm is, we've talked about it a lot of times, but I posted a thing on Good, Bad, or Bad Bad's Facebook page, and I usually get quite a bit of engagement on the Good, Bad, or Bad Bad Facebook page. Posted something last week. It had 1 like for hours. And I was like, what is happening?
As a platform, I don't mind it for my personal account, whatever.
Yeah.
But as a platform for a business account, I want to drop kick Facebook into the sun.
Yeah, it's not great.
If we did not have people that I knew were following us only on Facebook, we would not have a Facebook page because it's such a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
Anyway, on Twitter, did a little better. We had 11 votes for the movie and 1 person who said that they could not decide between the book and the movie. We did get a couple of comments. Sir Vinny, the Reverend Master of Gender and Pronouns, at Shady Shroomy,
nice.
said, I really like the movie. It's one of the only childhood movies I can look back on with no caveats and say it's exactly what I remember and just as good as I remember. The only other two like this are Lilo and Stitch and Atlantis.
I have not seen either of those since I was a little kid, so I can't comment.
I really like Lilo and Stitch. I would say that one holds up. I've only seen Atlantis once. That came out in the time frame where I was like starting to feel a little bit old to go see Disney movies, you know? So I think I saw it once and it didn't make much of an impression on me. But
I actually realizing now that I mistook it in my memory for Road to El Dorado. So because they're both about lost cities or whatever. So like,
fair enough.
Yeah. And I also, is Atlantis Disney or was it?
Yeah, that was a Disney one.
Was it? What's his name? I guess I'm also confusing it with Titan AE, which is Bluth. Oh, gosh. So all of those run together in my head as like the same movie. Anyways.
I think it is kind of tough with childhood movies because I feel like especially lately we've had this kind of like slew of like people revealing themselves.
Yes.
And so, and then you can maybe feel like a little bit awkward about like having this fondness for a particular thing.
Right, absolutely.
From your childhood.
Yeah.
J.K. Rowling, thank you.
Yeah, specifically. And I mean, and that, and we've talked about it and we don't need to get into it, but that, I still think the stories mostly hold up as we discussed on our episodes about them, regardless of what you think of, and you should think bad things about the person. She's a bad person for a lot of reasons, but I do think that the stories in general hold up, and so I don't necessarily feel ashamed about still liking Harry Potter, or not even ashamed, but like
weird about it.
Weird about it. We've again, you've tweeted about this. We've discussed the whole divorcing the work from the author thing, but
like I think there's that issue, and then there's just the issue of stuff not aging well.
Right. That's what I was
in general.
Yeah. And I think, there's lots of stuff, especially more like sort of, especially like 90s or really any time period comedies, but anything. Yeah. Definitely a lot of the humor has not aged well. And Babe is not the case in Babe. There's nothing that while we were at least nothing that stuck out to me, and I'm usually pretty good.
I mean, there were things here and there, I think, that were like, oh, that's of its time. Like the annoying goose.
Yes. And even,
but not in a problematic way.
No, not in a problematic way. I think like the most problematic element of the story is probably like, and it's not even, it's like maybe the sort of tropey nature of the man who hates his wife, like, and that's not even a super strong, but there is like a slight vibe of like the obnoxious nagging wife
and the henpecked husband.
And that's not the like, but it's not like it's not like a running get. It's just one of those things that's kind of there, like it's kind of in
There's
the background.
Like a slight hint of it in the background.
Yeah. And then also we talked about on the main episode, obviously the sort of ways that maybe the political thematic stuff kind of breaks down with you. Like some of the lines themselves don't necessarily hold up depending on what lens you're looking at the movie through.
Yeah.
But again, that's a little more nebulous and up to interpretation than just like straight up, obnoxious like homophobia and stuff that a lot of the movies of the time period had.
Shelby Suderman, at Shelby Suderman, said, "Thank you for doing this one. I really enjoyed revisiting this movie and seeing which elements originally came from the book. I was not prepared to realize how much this film influenced my taste in books and movies growing up. I really enjoyed the book, but this movie is just on another level. I thought they did a really good job fleshing out the ideas in the novel."
Absolutely. We agree. Was this Shelby's recommendation or who was?
No. Okay. This was from our name changing.
The name changer. Yes. This is from So Happy to Know That Babe is the one movie from my childhood that is still good.
Who I believe is the next Twitter comment.
I believe you are correct, yes.
From at Nathan Bodnar, who said, "I just loved Babe when I was a kid when I watched it, but now it turns out I was a fan of relevant leftist political commentary, and that feels really good. I can only assume that the same is true about Babe 2, Pig in the City." I cannot comment on that.
I have not seen
I don't think I've ever seen
Babe
2.
I think I've heard it's good. That one is also not only written by George Miller, but is also directed by George Miller from my memory. So we may have to do it at some point. I don't know if it's, or what, it's probably not based on a book though.
No, I don't believe so.
Okay. So then maybe we won't do it, but maybe a bonus episode or something. Because I would actually like to watch it based on how much I enjoyed Babe. I would actually be interested in watching the sequel and seeing kind of where they take, if the thematic messaging was not an accident, if it goes somewhere else interesting in the sequel, would be cool to see.
Yeah, that could be interesting to talk about. On Instagram, we had 13 votes for the movie and 2 for the book. Corinne and Neva said, I haven't seen the movie or listened to the episode yet or read the book since I was 9, but sacrilege.
Was that on the one where you said the movie
on the
is
one
better?
where I said the movie's better, yeah.
I appreciate their honesty.
And I believe the same listener commented on another post that this was like a childhood favorite book of theirs. Yeah. And the Leap_77 said, the movie is just utterly cute and delightful, but some vegans like myself consider it an allegory for our place in society. James Cromwell said years later it was rather bizarre they were all playing and filming with the pigs and then would turn around and eat bacon and ham at lunchtime. Understanding the cognitive dissonance turned him from a standard vegetarian to a still active vegan animal rights activist to this day. The end scene is oftentimes the social reaction we receive, as if we don't belong and only exist because there are no other rules stating otherwise. Either way, this film, and oddly the other pig movie that year, Gordy, are kind of hard watches because I love the animals, but I sometimes wish George Miller had gone a little harder with the friends not food sentiment that seems prevalent in the story.
Mm-hmm. I can see that, if you know.
That does seem like a kind of an obvious message.
And it is there,
into the movie,
which we did talk about. It's there, like it's definitely not the main thing. And as we discussed in the episode, it's definitely more. The movie is definitely more critical of factory farming as opposed to like meat eating in general,
right?
And so I'm definitely empathetic to the idea, and I think it is also interesting that because I do agree that especially in like America and a lot of the sort of developed Western world or whatever you want to call it, that vegans are in fact, or at least large swaths of the sort of Western world, vegans are, sort of merely tolerated by a lot of people. And I've said before that I think vegans are almost assuredly correct on everything. It's one of my moral failings, but that I continue to eat meat sometimes. But it is, I do think it is interesting that it is a very cultural, like specific thing, because they're in large portions of the world, specifically regions in the East and stuff, where veganism is, or at least vegetarianism is not, is I think not only not a minority of people, it's the majority of people. There are specific cultures where vegetarian, and mainly because of specific religions, where vegetarianism is much more prominent. Anyways, it is an interesting topic, and I do think that the movie, I think it could have gone harder on that message. I think they probably, especially at the time, it's still a message that people aren't very into on a widespread. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that when people ask, what beliefs and stuff do we have now as a society that you think 50 years from now we'll all be like, wow, how did we? It's similar to like the homophobic nature of 50 years ago compared to today. I would agree that I think it's probably likely that meat eating would be one of those things, but it is. I think they probably realized that it wasn't going to go down well.
I think it's a tough call because, especially here in America, the reaction to that falls so hard into the "you can't tell me what to do." Yes. Typical American response.
Yeah, it very much, the people who react most negatively to it tend to be the more freedom loving, claiming to, clinging to the idea of being freedom loving American, red blooded Americans. But it's not just that population. It's even among sort of more enlightened, quote unquote, for lack of a better phrase, groups within America. It's definitely still something that a lot of people just don't care about and don't care to discuss. And I get it, because it's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't like to discuss it because once you start to think about it a little bit, it's not an easy topic and it will make you uncomfortable.
No, for sure. And you know, I don't know how we're on this tangent.
Yeah. What do you mean how we're on it? Because this comment was about meat eating.
But I do think that the thing that will work in the favor of that cultural shift is that it is getting easier to not eat meat.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Animal products. Alternatives are far more widely available and affordable than they historically have been.
It was very hard to be a vegan in the 90s, I would feel like, compared to now.
Right.
Like, it's much easier.
Yeah, now I can go down to the grocery store and there's 5 different milk alternatives, for example, for me to choose from.
You go to Walmart and you can get a fake burger that tastes pretty close to a real burger. Like, a lot of them aren't great, but there are some that like the Beyond Meats and those things, which we eat a lot of like fake meat, alternate meat alternatives and stuff because we do think it's probably the best, a better idea. Ultimately, is probably the right moral thing to do. But and a lot of them, these days it's way easier. It's way more affordable than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. And I think as it gets more and more easier, and as lab grown meat becomes a thing that is not only like, because it's already kind of a thing, but it's like incredibly expensive to the point of like nobody can get it. Once I think that gets to a point where I think 10 or 15 years from now, I wouldn't be surprised if lab grown meat is in the same place that like, the veggie crumble meat alternatives are now. And when that happens, I think large portions of the world, especially in places where it's economically viable, will eat significantly less meat, which will be good for lots of reasons.
Yeah.
Anyways, all right, where do we end up on the final numbers?
So our winner this week was the movie with 27 votes to the book's 2. I think the book struggled a little bit this time for not being as well known as the movie. Yeah. Especially here in America.
For sure. Yeah. Definitely. And it's a beloved movie of people's childhood.
Yeah. Especially of like people our age, which is basically our demographic.
Yeah, the people who listen to the show tend to be people in the millennial age range, that kind of bracket,
Yeah, who remember this film fondly from their childhood.
Yep. All right. It is now time to learn a little bit about the spy fiction genre.
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
Dun, 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 dun. Sorry.
So spy fiction is a genre. We're going to talk specifically about literature for most of this because that is where it started. So this is a genre of literature involving espionage as an important context or as a plot device. At its core, a spy story is a tale of international intrigue and adventure. So spy fiction is thematically related to a couple of different other broader genres, those mainly being the adventure novel, the thriller, and the mystery/detective genre. Now, some people would define spy fiction as a subgenre of one or more of those genres. For me, I feel like we're getting a little bit into the weeds there. But whether you call it a genre or a subgenre, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
So spy fiction emerged in the early 20th century, largely inspired by rivalries and intrigues between the major world powers of the time and the beginning establishment of what we would recognize as modern intelligence agencies. So a few of the big names and titles to know from this kind of beginning time period are Kim by Rudyard Kipling, The Secret Agent and Under Western Eyes by Joseph Conrad, The 39 Steps by John Buchan, The Scarlet Pimpernel by Baroness Orczy, and The Man Who Was Thursday by G.K. Chesterton. Now, Sir Arthur...
Spy thrillers' names are always so great.
They're always super great. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, while he does belong like more solidly in the detective genre, does sometimes serve as a spy hunter for the British government. So we can put him into, something that helped bolster this genre as it was getting started. Now, obviously, this is not an exhaustive list. We just have some highlights here.
And I don't know how much, I don't know where you got, and it doesn't look like you go into anything else specific here, because I think the spy fiction genre, we're talking specifically, as you mentioned, kind of this came into vogue, and this specific sort of definition of the genre has to do with like the rise of again, intelligence agencies and stuff in the early 20th century. I would be interested to see if there was similar stories in non-Western cultures, because I'm thinking back to specifically, I'm thinking to stories that maybe would have come out from like feudalist like Japan and stuff, where like they're, and I know ninja is not the right word, but like people sneaking around and doing covert missions and stuff was a thing that we accept, that was happened in history. And I wonder if there are stories that we would find similar sort of, like maybe not tropes, but like similar sort of markers for like what we call the spy fiction genre in the West, again, starting in the early 20th century, to other cultures that had similar sort of dynamics within at earlier time periods. I would be interested to see. I don't know, and I'm sure. Like,
I'm sure that. Yeah, I'm sure that exists.
Yeah.
Again, these segments are primers.
Yes, I absolutely.
I mean, to put together an exhaustive, globally historical overview of everything that could potentially be part of, that would be a full-time job.
I agree. I wasn't asking for that. I just thought it would be interesting to see. Yeah, I think it could be an interesting topic to look into and see if there are roots further back. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there undoubtedly are.
Yes. Yeah.
So the term spy novel specifically was defined by 1903's The Riddle of the Sands by Erskine Childers. In which two amateur spies uncover a German plot to invade Britain. And that novel got super popular. That popularity kicked off a slew of imitators, which pushed the genre into the same space in the public consciousness as other popular but often disparaged genres like horror and crime fiction. So we now have something that is big enough to be popular, right?
Yeah.
To be pulp.
Yeah.
As it were. A penny dreadful.
I was about to say the penny dreadful when you said horror and crime fiction.
Yeah.
We just finished that show not too long ago.
So popularity kind of lagged off a little bit, but then it received a boost around the Second World War, driven by the rise of communism and fascism, which kind of got writers' imaginations going, continued to develop throughout the Cold War, getting further inspiration from real world. Oh my gosh. It continued to develop throughout the Cold War, getting further inspiration from real-world issues like rogue states, international crime organizations, global terrorist networks, maritime policy, and technological sabotage and espionage. So I think like one of the things that separates this genre from other similar genres, like something that's just a thriller maybe, is the idea of this being a global stage.
Yeah.
Right? The idea of it being intrigue between various global powers that have far reach.
I would say it almost has to be for it to be a spy thriller. It almost I think it doesn't have to be. That's not true, but yeah, the global stage and almost primarily tend to be between nations, like the conflicts between nations. It doesn't have to be. They can be like inter
right. Yeah, conflicts between nations, or perhaps between a nation and like a global organization of some sort, like a terrorist organization, etc.
Yeah, or even there are some that I think could even fit like within. But it's got to be within some sort of like governmental structure. Like there could be a spy thriller set within just like, not warring factions, but like set just within like the U.S. government, like somebody from the CIA spying on somebody else in the CIA, like whatever. I think that could be a thing. But in general, that like global stage, like you said, I think makes...
Yeah, it is something
definitely,
that sets this genre apart from, like I said, other similar genres.
Yeah.
So a handful of names and titles to know from this era of the genre's development are Above Suspicion by Helen McGinnis, Graham Greene's The Ministry of Fear and The Quiet American,
Atomsk is how I would say it.
Atomsk, Atomsk, by Paul Linebarger, Secret Ministry by Desmond Corey, East of Farewell by E. Howard Hunt, and of course, Ian Fleming's James Bond.
Never heard of him.
Now synonymous with the genre, whose first appearance was in 1952's Casino Royale. Again, it's not an exhaustive list, just a couple of highlights. Yep. So don't come for me if I didn't mention your fave. Now, another interesting note here is that spy fiction in the USSR did not develop along the same lines as it did in the Western world. Now, while Western fiction typically portrayed spies as being heroes fighting for their respective countries, right? They're the good guys. Mm-hmm. The subject of espionage was treated in the Soviet Union as stories of villainous foreign spies come to threaten the USSR. So they're the villains.
Interesting.
Consequently, there were no like Bond-style spy novels featuring Soviet heroes until 1963's The Zakov Mission by Andrei Gulyashki.
Yeah.
And this about face was largely bolstered by an effort by the KGB to improve ordinary citizens' concept of the Chekisti, or the secret police.
Which is a continuing trend in modern fiction. I don't know if you're going to talk about that later or not. I haven't read your notes, but like that's still, at least in America for sure, and around the world, huge amounts of
propaganda.
Yes, of government money is dumped into projects like Marvel movies and spy, like the whole Jack Ryan series with Jim from The Office.
I don't have that specifically in my notes, but yeah, you're right.
Like the government and is way into. It's one of the reasons that like it, you know, even when Marvel movies get their most subversive, the military and government agencies tend to still be the good guys, and if they're not, they're a made up agency, or like it's, you know, it's in like Winter Soldier, like it's S.H.I.E.L.D. and they're infiltrated by Hydra. It's like, right, so like it's not like the army that is evil in a Marvel movie. It's because a big part of that is because the infrastructure, the military industrial sort of infrastructure in America dumps money into those movies and goes, make us look good, and they're like, sure, we'll do that.
So continuing through the latter half of the 20th century and into the 21st, the genre was bolstered by serialized spy fiction, introducing popular characters who appeared across multiple novels. For example, as you mentioned, Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan, and of course, Robert Ludlum's Jason Bourne. The genre also continues to draw inspiration from real-world events, such as the conflict between Israel and Palestine, 9/11, Middle Eastern political conflicts in general have been a huge like source of inspiration for this genre, especially
since the 90s.
Yes,
like since,
absolutely.
Yeah, the conflicts in the Middle East have become sort of taken over the global stage in terms of like,
and especially like with the end of the Cold War, with the end of the Cold War and that kind of decline of the overt conflict between the U.S. and Russia.
The overt subvert conflict. It's funny calling the Cold War an overt conflict.
The overt subvert conflict. But we tend to focus much more now on the like Middle Eastern stage. And as you mentioned, there is that element of propaganda. to these stories.
Because if you do look previous to like the 90s or so, you know, when the Cold War was still all the way up until, like I said, the early 90s or so, like the Jack Ryan movies, there's no shortage of those. Like some of the earlier ones are about Russia, are about like nukes and, you know, like they're about the Cold War conflict and stuff like that. And then there are other ones that have to do with like the conflicts in like Eastern Europe and stuff, like post I don't know the right word for it, but like after the USSR dissolved, and then like the conflicts within each of those countries around like this is not a spy thriller necessarily, but the Behind Enemy Lines, the Owen Wilson movie, is about like it's not the Armenian genocide, but it's about a genocide in one of those Eastern European countries, and like I think Russia's role in it and that sort of thing. Like it's, you know, so a lot of that stuff. But then obviously post 1990 and the Gulf War, and then even more so post 9/11. Yeah,
and I think too, even if you look further back at the genre, like during the Second World War, post the Second World War, during the Cold War, it's not propaganda in the West, because there is this trend of portraying like spies are the heroes, right? They're the good guys.
Yep.
So it's not propaganda, but it's not propaganda like current spy fiction is propaganda.
At least from what my understanding is that it's not quite in the same way where I don't believe it was. I could be wrong about this. I'd be interested to hear. I'm sure there are people out there who know a lot more about like early spy fiction and stuff. Or I say early, but you know, like spy fiction of the 60s, 70s, 80s, that genre, that period. I would imagine that it's not quite as governmentally endorsed, because the government was too busy like fucking up other countries, like.
As if we're not busy doing that
we
now.
We still are doing that, but I feel like it was a little bit, I don't know. I have a whole note about our entanglements in other nations in my movie notes, which we'll talk about. But.
All right, very excited. So modern spy fiction has two distinct branches. One is stories that focus on technology and blend the genre with science fiction. Sometimes this is called spy-fi.
Spy-fi.
And the other branch is stories that employ bleak realism. Now, another less common subgenre of spy fiction is actually spy comedy, which is usually a parody of the cliches and like the campier elements that can be characteristic to the genre itself.
Which is funny because James Bond has fluctuated between all of those genres over its period. It has gone from spy-fi, like, you know, where it's all about the gadgets and gizmos and stuff, to at times being straight up seemingly like parody of almost James Bond movies at times, like Moonraker and stuff. I don't know if they are parody. They're probably not, but they might as well be. All the way to the more modern, the Daniel Craig ones, which are still, they have their like gadgetry spy-fi stuff, but they're also a more grounded, like sort of grim, like gritty version of the James Bond genre.
Now, obviously, this genre is not limited to literature, and it has been crossing over into other types of entertainment practically since its inception, including theater, video games, tabletop games, and especially television and film. Film probably being the most notable, because as soon as we had the capability to make spy movies, we started really cranking them out.
Yep.
Which brings us to The Bourne Identity.
All right, let's go ahead and learn a little bit about The Bourne Identity, the book.
He has the skills.
You! Stop right there!
Of a dangerous man.
I need to know what went wrong.
I think he snapped.
But he has no memory.
We don't take care of this, we will both burn. It's trained, conditioned, built to disappear.
I'll give you $10,000 to drive me to Paris.
I get the money, and I don't get hurt.
That's the deal.
Now, the government's top agent.
I can't remember anything that happened before 2 weeks ago.
Amnesia?
Yes.
Is about to become their #1 target.
The Bourne Identity is a 1980s spy fiction thriller written by Robert Ludlum. It is the first novel of the original Bourne trilogy, which also includes The Bourne Supremacy and The Bourne Ultimatum. So supposedly, According to an interview that Ludlum gave, the idea behind the Bourne trilogy came about after he had a bout of temporary amnesia. After his first book, The Scarlatti Inheritance, was published, he supposedly could not remember 12 hours of his life. That event, combined with reading thrilling real-life spy stories, inspired him to create this character of Jason Bourne and get this trilogy started. On the subject of Jason Bourne's name, some have speculated that the name was most likely inspired by Ansel Bourne, a famous 19th century psychology case due to the experience of probable dissociative fugue.
Dissociative.
Dissociative?
Yeah.
I never pronounce
No,
that word.
it's the word that when you look at it, looks like there
Dissociative.
could, because you associate, it feels like there should be an A in there, but there's not.
Dissociative fugue.
Yeah.
Which has been described as a state in which an individual has lost their identity, which is basically what happens in the book.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that this novel is the first in a trilogy. All three of those were written by Robert Ludlum. After Ludlum's death, author Eric Van Lustbader...
What a name.
I know.
That guy. Holy cow, he lucked out. He went into the wrong genre, but whatever.
Eric Van Lustbader,
I mean, why would you not be writing romantic fiction with a name like Aaron von Lustbader? Anyways.
I mean, are thrillers not just the male romance genre? We won't get into it.
If he was writing Bond movies, well, yeah. If he was writing Bond books, I'd say sure. To be fair, I've never read a Bond book, but based on the movies, I'm assuming. But the Bourne are a little different, for at least the movies. Again, I've never read the book, so...
So he picked up where Ludlum left off and continued the story of Jason Bourne, writing The Bourne Legacy, The Bourne Betrayal, The Bourne Sanction, The Bourne Deception, The Bourne Objective, The Bourne Dominion, The Bourne Imperative, The Bourne Retribution, The Bourne Ascendancy, The Bourne Enigma, and The Bourne Initiative.
No, thank you. It's too much. I mean, I get it. It's the same thing as like James Bond, but still, just...
It's a lot. It's a lot.
It's a
lot to ask of one character.
It's really interesting to me, too. I mean, I guess I would be interested to see... I've seen, and we'll get into it when we talk about the movies here in a minute, I've seen the first two, if not first three, Bourne movies, and I remember nothing about them other than the premise of the first one.
I thought there were only three.
We'll talk about it. There's more than that. But the only thing I remember is basically the rough premise of the first one, which is Jason Bourne doesn't remember who he is, and the government's trying to get him. Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, that's the premise that I know. Other than that, I don't remember anything. And to me, I'm really interested. I'd be really interested to see what the story would become on book number 9, because the interesting thing is he's a person who doesn't remember who he is, and the government agency he worked for previously is trying to murder him, trying to get him or whatever. Once you're past that, it just turns into a normal spy thriller, right? Like, which, I mean, you can do that, but I feel like you've lost your hook. I don't know, like...
Maybe, I mean, I guess you can just continue to remember things.
Yeah, maybe. And again, I remember nothing from the movies. I'm sure some of that is addressed, but it is. I would be interested to see what book number 22 in the Bourne, the Bourne
series.
Series. That's the word I was looking for. I was trying to come up with whatever the Greek or Latin word for 20 was, and I couldn't.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, the Bourne Vintology. There you go.
I like it. Whenever I see a property that has just like a slew
That's Italian,
of different,
anyways, sorry,
a slew of different things in it, like different books or different movies.
Yeah.
For some reason, I always think of The Land Before Time.
Oh yeah, because
where they just kept cranking out straight to VHS. Anyway. Aside from the Matt Damon films, this novel has also been adapted as a 1988 television movie starring Richard Chamberlain and Jaclyn Smith. The story was also partially adapted in the 1989 Tamil language film Vetri Visa, starring Kamal Hassan.
Interesting. I'm glad you had that note because I didn't put that in mine, but I was going to mention it. So, good job.
Upon the novel's release, Kirkus Review... Kirk is famously known for loving genre fiction.
Yeah.
Kirk's Review called it another dizzily preposterous Ludlum comic strip full of hyperventilating characters, pell-mell intrigue, and barbarous prose.
Good Lord.
And shamelessly dumb entertainment.
That every critic's wet dream writing sentences like that. Just laying into it.
Dizzily preposterous. That might be my favorite part.
Somebody needs to come up with a term for critical language. Like, I'm sure there is, but like there needs to be a word or a term or like a whatever for that kind of critic talk where it's like
pompous
criticism that is like overly verbose and like overly mean, but like doing it in a smarty pants way so it like doesn't come across as mean. Like, I don't know, there's got to be a word for that. There probably is, and I don't know what it is, but for that kind of writing I feel like there should be.
In 2008, Peter Cannon of Publishers Weekly named The Bourne Identity among the best spy novels of all time after John le Carre's The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. So Kirkus Review didn't like it.
Not a fan.
Other people felt differently.
There you go. Alrighty then, let's go ahead now and find out about The Bourne Identity, the film.
What's in Paris?
It's a name, Jason Bourne.
Let's see if the Paris police can find him for us.
And the only way he can survive
Talk a lot.
is to find out who he is.
I guess you're not home. Monsieur Bourne!
I don't recognize any of this.
Before they find out
Get the address. I think I got it.
Enhance.
where he is.
The second film, as you mentioned, because there is a 1988 made-for-TV movie. But the one we're discussing is the 2002 film directed by Doug Liman, also known as the director of Edge of Tomorrow, Jumper, Swingers, and most recently, Chaos Walking, that movie that nobody saw. It's got Daisy Ridley and Tom Spider-Man.
That trailer that we keep seeing and you were like, nobody wants this movie.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and there's a whole backstory about this movie. It's been in production for literally 6 years and kept getting pushed back and back and back and re-edited and reshot and anyways. But yeah, that Doug Liman directed it. Edge of Tomorrow is supposedly a great film. It is written by Tony Gilroy, also known for Rogue One, Armageddon, The Devil's Advocate, and basically every Bourne movie, except for one of them, I think. The film stars Matt Damon, Franca Potente, I don't know how to say her last name.
Potente feels right in my soul.
Chris Cooper, Clive Owen, Brian Cox, Adewale. Oh no, shoot! I wrote down a pronunciation for this.
Yeah, you did. It's right there.
Yeah, I know. Adewale Akinoye Agbaje, I believe, is how you say his name, and Julia Stiles. The film is 83% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, has a 68% on Metacritic, and a 7.9 out of 10 on IMDb. It made $214 million against a budget of $60 million, which is why there are now, I think, 5 of these movies. As you mentioned earlier, you thought there were only 3.
I really thought there were only 3.
The 5 of the films are The Bourne Identity, The Bourne Supremacy, The Bourne Ultimatum, which follows the
original
ones you
trilogy,
mentioned. The Bourne Legacy, which I believe also was maybe one of the ones I can't remember now. It doesn't look like it is up there. No, it is. It is. Yeah, that's one of the Eric Van Lustbader ones. It looked like maybe his first one is The Bourne Legacy, which that film does not star Matt Damon. It stars Jeremy Renner.
Does he still play Bourne?
No, he plays a different character, but I believe that's why it's called The Bourne Legacy. I think he's just a different guy where a similar thing happened. I've never seen that one. And then finally, most recently, I believe in 2016 or 2017, Jason Bourne, which is where Matt Damon returned to the film series.
And he gets his own he is the title of the movie.
Yes.
Nice.
And I've never seen that one, so I don't know what the plot of that. I think I have seen the first three, and I remember zero about them, like I said. Doug Liman read the novel in high school, and he'd been a fan ever since. He was finishing up Swingers, which I believe Matt Damon is in, I'm pretty sure. And he decided to start working on an adaptation of the Bourne Identity. This is what I thought was really interesting, or one of the things I thought was really interesting. So Doug Liman's father, Arthur Liman, was involved, apparently, in investigating the Iran-Contra affair. And much of Alexander Conklin's character, who is played by Chris Cooper in the movie, and I believe he's like the government dude. Mm-hmm. Like he's like the guy in charge of the program or whatever, who's like hunting him. I can't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it. But much of that character was based on Lyman's father's recollection of Oliver North. Oliver North is a real person, or was. I don't know if he's alive still. Hopefully not. Oliver North was a participant in the Iran-Contra affair, in which he was involved in selling, if you don't know what the Iran-Contra affair is where the U.S. government sold, again, real basic, top-level view of what the Iran-Contra affair was. The U.S. government, including Oliver North, he was involved in this, sold weapons to Iran and then funneled the profits from selling those weapons to Iran to the Contras, which is why it's called the Iran-Contra affair. The Contras in Nicaragua, who were a right-wing rebel group that the U.S. was backing and funding in opposition to the Marxist-Sandinista Junta of National Reconstruction government in Nicaragua, which was a government that had recently overthrown which was a leftist government that had recently overthrown basically the monarch. It's not a monarchy, but but essentially the monarchy that had ruled in Nicaragua for
so
decades.
They had overthrown like the sitting government.
The sitting government, but not a democratic government,
right.
like an autocracy essentially. And I'm sure I'm getting a lot of details wrong here. This is just, I did a very brief Googling to remind myself what the Iran-Contra affair was. And so it's another in the long line of the U.S. fucking with less leftist governments in developing nations. And Lyman did admit that he jettisoned much of the content of the novel beyond the central premise in order to modernize the material and conform it to his own beliefs regarding the United States foreign policy. Which, again, his father was, from what it sounded like, involved in sort of maybe potentially prosecuting or whatever the people within the Reagan administration who were responsible for the whole Iran-Contra affair, and then again, and thus the backing of right-wing rebel groups trying to overthrow leftist governments in South America because they saw it as a threat to the global capitalist system that we were currently still stuck in. Yeah, boy, the 80s and even to today, our history in South America is real wild stuff. If you ever do any reading about it, it's something. I mean, everywhere, not just South America, but specifically, we've done a lot of fucking with socialists in South America in our time as a nation. So this is cool. Brad Pitt was approached to play the role of Jason Bourne, but he turned it down to star in Spy Game, which I've never seen.
I've never heard of that.
I had heard of it, but I don't know anything about it, and I guarantee it's not as successful as the Bourne series was. Not that Brad Pitt needed the money or anything, but other actors that were approached to play Jason Bourne included, and again, as always, some of these make sense to me and some of them don't. Russell Crowe, I can see that one. That kind of works. I get it. Arnold Schwarzenegger, I get it in the sense of he's an action star, but not for this role to me. Again, maybe it's because I'm blinded by what having seen Matt Damon in this role. Matt Damon is obviously very much not Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess the odd thing to me is that, and I don't know how the movie compares to the book yet, but in the book, Bourne is supposed to be very nondescript.
Yeah.
And kind of neutral. And Arnold Schwarzenegger is not only huge, he has such an accent.
Yeah, an accent and just a look Matt Damon is fairly nondescript.
He's an everyman.
Yeah. And I have heard that the character in the book is significantly older than I don't know if that's, but at least he's supposed to be somewhat older than Matt Damon is in the movies.
Probably, yeah.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Cruise makes sense. Again, he's a little bit more of an everyman kind of.
But do you want a guy who's already famous for playing a different spy?
You don't want Ethan Hunt to be Jason Bourne. It's a little. And Sylvester Stallone, which again falls more to me into the Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, too unique.
Yeah. Before they finally landed on Damon. Matt Damon had never played such a physically demanding role, mostly playing, this is like, he's like the smart Boston frat guy is like what he did before this. But he insisted on doing many of the stunts himself, a la Tom Cruise. He trained for 3 months with the film's stunt coordinator, Nick Powell. And one of the major stunts that he does in the movie that is him doing it is I think it's towards the end of the film, he climbs either up or down like 30 or 40 feet of this building. And apparently he did that himself. And he said it was the most grueling thing that I've ever had to do. So this is interesting. There's a lot of tension apparently on set and during the filming of The Bourne Identity between Doug Liman and the studio. Executives were super unhappy with the film's pacing and the emphasis on small-scale action sequences and the general relationship between themselves and Liman. They didn't like working with him. And because he was suspicious of like their involvement, he didn't want them messing with his film.
Same.
Yeah. And I thought it was interesting. A particular point of contention was in regards to the original, Tony Gilroy script, where there were scenes that are set in the farmhouse at the end of the film. Lyman and Matt Damon apparently were on the same side in this. It was them versus the studio from what it sounds like. But they fought super hard to keep those scenes in the film after they were cut by the studio in a rewrite. And then they argued that those scenes were like super important, even though they were kind of low key. They're super integral to the audience understanding who Bourne is and understanding the film's central themes. Which I haven't seen this movie since it came out, and I didn't know there were themes. So I'll be interested because I was a dumb 14-year-old when I saw this movie, and I was like, I like when Matt Damon punched people. So I'll be interested to see thematically what this movie's got going for it. So there's a very famous car chase in this movie, often compared to like The French Connection or The Sting. I think it's The Sting, whatever. It's one of the more famous car chase scenes. Turns out that car chase sequence was primarily not filmed by Doug Liman. It was filmed by the second unit director, Alexander Witt, who had already worked on a lot of stuff, including like Speed 2, Gladiator at this time. But he went on to work on films like American Gangster, X-Men First Class, Skyfall, and Avengers Infinity War, all as a second unit DP or director, which second unit often does a lot of like the action-y stuff, whereas the first unit will do more of like the character focused stuff so that the director, the whoever the build top name director can spend more time working with the actual actors and stuff and working with their performances, whereas a lot of the action-y stuff will be handed off to a second unit director who maybe specializes in action and doesn't have to work as closely with like performances and stuff like that. So eventually the finished footage that they filmed all over Paris of this car chase scene was edited together to create the illusion of a journey that actually made sense. Turns out Lyman confessed that, quote, anyone who really knows Paris will find it completely illogical, since few of the locations used in the car chase actually connect to each other. So many places you'll see in the movie, if you know Paris, it's like, well, that's nowhere near. Like they'll drive around a corner and you'll be like, wait a second, they just teleported across Paris. Yeah. Which happens in lots of movies.
Yeah.
Not just this. I thought this was interesting. So Doug Liman did a lot of the camera work himself, according to the research I did, which is not common for the director to like grab the camera and operate it himself. But also for the camera operator that was working on the film, he apparently didn't let the camera op watch the rehearsals because he wanted the camera to be late getting to people delivering their lines to add an edge to the film so that it felt, and it does give it from my memory. This is a very shaky cam kind of movie.
Good.
Yeah. And part of that is it gives it, they're going for a more documentary style feel, and having your camera op getting sort of realizing, not knowing who's going to talk when and spinning the camera around and getting the people's mouths late and stuff feels much more like a documentary than everything being like rehearsed and planned out and that sort of thing. So there's a red bag, a famous red bag that Jason Bourne has in the consulate in this film, and that is now owned by Adam Savage of the Mythbusters. If you go to his YouTube channel, there's several videos where he talks about purchasing this prop and going through it, and you can see all the little details of it and stuff. This is interesting, especially for our purposes. At Doug Liman's instruction, Tony Gilroy, the screenwriter, didn't read any of the Bourne Identity. Instead, he worked solely from an outline. He worked solely from an outline prepared by Doug Liman. So Liman read it, wrote up an outline, and said, "Use this. Don't read the book."
Oh boy. Okay.
So, yep, it's going to be a mess.
Okay.
Just thought I'd warn you ahead of time.
Cool.
And finally, I love getting in my Roger Ebert reviews because they're always so interesting. He gave this film 3 out of 4 stars and praised it for absorbing the viewer in its, quote, spycraft and, quote, Damon's ability to be focused and sincere, concluding that the film was, quote, unnecessary but not unskilled, which is, what a line. Imagine calling a film
I mean, it's nicer than dizzily preposterous.
This is true. It's just such an interesting choice of words. I would really like to see the full review to see like contextually where that, you know what I mean? Because with just those few words, unnecessary but not unskilled. I feel like there's maybe some words before that make them a little
shed
more...
a little light onto the context.
Yeah.
That's a great pull quote, though.
Yeah. Unnecessary, but not unskilled.
I would splash that right on my movie poster.
Yeah. I mean, I guess he's true. It's true in the sense of like a lot of movies aren't necessary, but like
fair
whatever.
enough.
I don't know. Doug Liman thought he had a point of view and was doing had some thematic, some thematically relevant stuff to say. Apparently, Roger Ebert did not agree, or at least it seems like it. All right, that's all I had. So where can you watch it? As always, check your local library, or if you still have a local video rental store, go check with them. You can stream the film with a subscription on Sling or USA. So I assume if you have cable or any of those providers, you might be able to find it on maybe on demand or something
maybe.
through USA, or record it through USA. Or you can rent it for $4 on Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube, Fandango, Now, Vudu, Redbox, DirecTV, AMC Theaters on Demand, etc. Pretty much probably any place that has streaming rental stuff. Have you seen this movie?
No.
Cool.
I'm very excited. The thing that I always think of when I think about the Bourne movies, not having seen any of them, do you remember, I'm about to date myself on the internet here. Way back, I want to say I watched this early college, so I'm going to put this somewhere between 2008 and 2010. There was a viral video that was a parody movie trailer of the Bourne movies, but it was about Where's Waldo.
That sounds vaguely familiar, but I'm not like, yes, I know what that is, but it does sound
and it
familiar.
Lives in my brain rent-free. I'll share it on our social media.
Absolutely. Yeah, that'll be good. Yeah, I that does it sounds. If
I can find
familiar.
it, I don't even know if it exists anymore.
I'm sure it's somewhere. It sounds familiar, but I can't. Yeah, I don't. Nothing's jumping into my mind like, oh yeah, I've definitely seen that. Yeah, I'm excited to watch it again because I haven't seen this since it came out. Maybe I've seen it once after that, like in college or something. But it's been in over 10 years, if not longer. Probably closer to...
It's not a genre that I would usually go in for on my own, so I am excited to partake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from my memory, it's a good one. At least the first one, I remember enjoying, and it's a fun, action-packed thrill ride. And again, I will be really interested this time to see thematically if there's much going on, which it sounds like Doug Liman wanted there to be. So we'll see if we get that from it. So. Alrighty then, that's in 1 week's time. We'll be talking about the Bourne Identity. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.